The slap of truth came at the dinner table. My son-in-law leaned back in his chair, swirling his glass of wine like he was auditioning for some cheap power fantasy, and laughed, loud enough for everyone to hear. "So tell me," he said, smirking, "how does it feel to be a loser?" The table went quiet. My daughter froze. My grandchildren stopped eating. Even the chandelier above us seemed to hum with discomfort. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't clench my fists. I didn't defend myself. I smiled. I set my fork down carefully, folded my napkin, and looked him straight in the eye. "How does it feel," I asked calmly, "to know that this loser will no longer be paying your bills?" The color drained from his face in seconds. No one laughed this time. I stood up, kissed my grandchildren on the head, thanked my daughter for the meal, and walked out into the cool night air like nothing had happened. My hands didn't shake. My heart didn't race, because the decision had already been made. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the silence inside my car felt different. Not heavy, clean, final. Inside my house, I didn't turn on the television. I went straight to my study, the same room where I had paid bills quietly for years, where I had solved problems no one knew existed. I opened the filing cabinets. 15 years of folders stared back at me. Mortgage assistance, car payments, private school tuition, insurance premiums, medical bills, vacation emergencies, credit card rescues. Every sacrifice neatly documented, every dollar traceable. They called me a loser because I was retired, because I drove an old truck, because I didn't brag. What they never understood was that silence doesn't mean weakness, it means control. I ran the numbers slowly, methodically, not in anger, not in revenge, in clarity. By midnight, the total sat on my calculator like a verdict. Just under $1 million. That was the cost of being taken for granted. At 9:02 the next morning, I made my first call to the bank. Then another. Then another. Automatic payments were canceled. Transfers were stopped. Safety nets were removed. No warning, no announcement. I didn't owe them one. By noon, the first call came in. Confused, not panicked yet. By evening, the tone changed. By the next morning, panic had replaced arrogance. But I didn't answer. I made coffee. I sat at my kitchen table. I watched the sun rise through the window. For 15 years, I had been invisible while carrying everything. Now, for the first time, they were finally about to feel the weight of their own lives. And this time, I wasn't there to catch them. 15 years earlier, my life looked very different. My wife Martha was still alive then. She had a laugh that filled rooms and a habit of touching my arm whenever she spoke, as if to remind me I was real. When cancer took her in late 2008, it didn't just leave a hole in my heart. It shattered the structure of our family overnight. At her funeral, my daughter Carolyn collapsed against me, sobbing so hard she could barely stand. "Dad," she whispered through tears, "I don't know how we're going to survive. Sheldon's job isn't stable. The mortgage alone is $2,800 a month." I remember holding her and making a promise I believed was temporary. "Don't worry," I said. "I'll help until you're stable." That word mattered. Until. The first mortgage payment I covered was February 2009. $2,800. One time, I told myself. Then March came. Another $2,800. Then April. Sheldon had just started at a mid-level sales job. He swore a promotion was coming. 6 months, he said, maybe less. 6 months turned into years. I paid their mortgage every single month for 15 years. 2,800 multiplied by 180 months. 504,000. $500,000 just to keep a roof over their heads. Then came the cars. Sheldon insisted appearances mattered for his career. Clients expected success, confidence. He leased a BMW. Caroline drove an SUV for the kids. The combined payments were $1,200 a month. I paid those too. 8 years of car payments came out to $115,200. When their first child, Tommy, reached kindergarten age, Caroline told me public school wasn't competitive enough. Private school tuition was $24,000 a year. Then Emma was born. Another tuition bill. 16 years of private education, summer programs, after-school activities. $192,000. Medical insurance followed when Sheldon's company downsized and benefits disappeared. Dental bills, emergency room visits, therapy sessions when Caroline said she felt overwhelmed. $8,000 a year for 15 years. $120,000. Vacations appeared quietly. Disney World, a European cruise. Ski trips they said were for the kids' development. I paid those too. Kitchen renovations, new furniture, emergency credit card bailouts, Christmas gifts that somehow got more expensive every year. By the time I stopped counting, miscellaneous support had crossed $45,000. I never wrote checks dramatically. I never announced my help. I automated everything. I made myself invisible. I drove a 15-year-old truck. I skipped vacations. I postponed retirement investing. I lived in a modest 2-bedroom home while watching my son-in-law show off a lifestyle built entirely on my silence. At first, gratitude flowed freely. Handwritten thank you notes, Sunday dinners, Sheldon fixing my gutters or mowing my lawn. "Dad, we'll pay you back someday," Caroline used to say. But slowly, gratitude turned into expectation. "Dad, can you just handle it? Dad, you don't understand how expensive kids are. Dad, this is what families do." The word please disappeared. Then thank you vanished. Eventually, even acknowledgement died. At neighborhood barbecues, Sheldon bragged about his financial discipline. He talked about providing for his family while standing in a house I paid for, driving a car I leased, sending children to schools I funded. Last Christmas, he raised a glass and toasted his hard work. No mention of me. No mention of the $976,200 quietly bleeding out of my retirement. That night at dinner, when he called me a loser, it wasn't the insult that hurt. It was the audacity, the entitlement, the assumption that my sacrifice was invisible, endless, and owed. When I added up the numbers in my study, I didn't cry. I felt something colder. Clarity. I realized something most people never do. Kindness without boundaries is not generosity. It is permission. And I had been giving permission for 15 years. The change didn't happen all at once. That's the part people never understand. If Sheldon had been openly cruel from the beginning, I would have stopped long ago. But entitlement doesn't arrive kicking down the door. It slips in quietly, wearing familiarity, disguising itself as comfort. The first signs were small. Phone calls from Caroline became shorter. Less, "How are you feeling, Dad?" and more, Can you help us with something real quick? Sunday dinners turned into obligations instead of visits. Sheldon started checking his phone while I spoke, nodding without listening. When I mentioned tightening my budget after retirement, he laughed. "Come on," he said once, waving his hand. "You're fine. You've always been fine." Always. That word sat wrong with me. When I drove my old truck to their house, Sheldon would joke about upgrading. "Still driving that thing?" he'd say. "You know, success is about image." I smiled and let it go. When I suggested public school for the kids one year, Caroline snapped. "Dad, don't embarrass us. Everyone here sends their kids to private academies." Embarrass us. As if I were the liability. By year 10, the language had shifted completely. No requests, just expectations. The mortgage payment didn't come with a thank you anymore. It came with a reminder if I was late. The car payment was urgent. The tuition invoice was non-negotiable. The vacation deposit was already booked. Sheldon stopped pretending the money wasn't mine. He started talking about it like it was theirs. At a neighborhood barbecue, I overheard him telling someone, "We've built a pretty solid financial base. Good planning. Long-term vision." I stood there holding a paper plate, listening to a man take credit for a foundation he never laid. When I gently suggested they try covering one expense themselves, just to practice independence, Sheldon scoffed. "Why would we do that?" he said. "You've got it handled." That was the moment something cracked. Not in my heart, in my understanding. I wasn't helping anymore. I was enabling. Caroline defended him every time. "He's under a lot of pressure, Dad. You don't understand modern costs. This is just how families work now." But families work on gratitude, on mutual respect, not on silent extraction. The grandchildren notice before anyone else. Emma once asked me why Dad got angry when bills arrived. Tommy asked why Grandpa always paid for everything. I laughed it off. But inside, something was shifting. Last Christmas sealed it. Sheldon raised a glass in front of everyone. "To hard work," he said proudly, "to providing for your family." Everyone applauded. I sat there, invisible. Not acknowledged, not thanked, not even mentioned. That was when I understood the truth I'd been avoiding. They didn't see my help as sacrifice. They saw it as entitlement. And entitlement, once normalized, always escalates. So when Sheldon called me a loser at that dinner, it didn't feel sudden. It felt inevitable. That insult wasn't about me. It was about power. He believed I was weak because I was quiet. He believed retirement meant irrelevance. He believed the man paying his bills had no authority left. He was wrong. But I let him believe it, right up until the moment I stopped. The dinner was supposed to be a celebration. Sheldon had just been promoted, and Carolyn insisted we all gather at their house. The table was set perfectly. Candles, wine glasses, the good plates. Everything looked successful on the surface. That was the problem. Sheldon sat at the head of the table, relaxed, confident, already halfway through his second glass of wine. He talked loudly about his new title, his future, his trajectory. I listened quietly. I always did. At one point, he leaned back in his chair and looked at me like I was an amusing relic. "Retirement must be nice," he said. "No pressure, no deadlines, no real responsibility." Carolyn laughed nervously. I kept eating. "You had a decent career," he continued, "but let's be honest. That was a different era. Things move fast now. Digital, competitive. Takes a younger mindset. My granddaughter Emma looked up from her plate. "Grandpa built me a tree house," she said proudly, "all by himself." Sheldon smiled thinly and patted her head. "That's cute," he said, "but real men provide. They don't coast." The word hung in the air. Coast. I felt Caroline shift beside me. She knew where this was going. She always did, and she never stopped it. Then Sheldon leaned forward. "I've been thinking," he said. "Now that I'm making real money, 6 figures, maybe it's time everyone started pulling their own weight." Pulling their own weight. I knew exactly who he was talking about. He gestured toward Caroline. "She's been out of the workforce for a long time, living off, well, family charity." Charity. That was the word he chose. Tommy dropped his fork. Emma's eyes filled with confusion. I set my fork down slowly. Sheldon turned to me fully then, emboldened by his audience. "I don't mean to be rude," he said, smiling, "but when was the last time you actually accomplished something?" I met his eyes. "When was the last time you earned your way?" he added. The room went silent. Then he laughed, loud, careless, cruel. "So tell me," he said, "how does it feel to be a loser?" That was the moment. Not because it hurt, but because something inside me shut off completely. No anger, no sadness, just calculation. I looked around the table, at my daughter, who didn't defend me, at my grandchildren, who didn't understand what they were witnessing, at the man who believed the ground beneath him was solid because he had never seen the hands holding it up. I smiled. I asked my question, and when I stood up to leave, I already knew this wasn't a fight. It was an ending. By the time my car door closed behind me, I wasn't reacting. I was executing. That insult wasn't a mistake. It was the truth of who he had become. And truths have consequences. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was angry. Anger burns hot and fast. What I felt was colder, sharper. I went straight to my study and turned on the desk lamp. The same lamp I'd used for years to balance accounts, solve problems, quietly clean up messes no one ever noticed. I opened the first filing cabinet, January 2009. The folders were color-coded, just the way my engineer's brain preferred. Blue for housing, green for transportation, yellow for education, red for medical. Each folder carried a quiet history of responsibility. I pulled out the mortgage statements first. $2,800. February, March, April, year after year, month after month. I laid them out across the desk in neat rows. My calculator clicked softly in the silence. 504,000. Just to keep their house standing. I sat back in my chair for a moment, not in shock, in recognition. Then I opened the transportation folder. BMW lease payments, insurance premiums, maintenance, late fees I had quietly absorbed so Sheldon wouldn't lose credibility at work. 115,200. Next came education, private school invoices, registration fees, uniforms, summer programs, piano lessons, sports leagues. I paused when I saw Tommy's kindergarten enrollment form. I remembered how proud Caroline had sounded on the phone that day. "He's going to have every opportunity," she said. He did, because I paid for it. 192,000. Medical expenses followed. Insurance premiums, when Sheldon's job didn't provide coverage. Dental work, emergency room visits, therapy sessions, Caroline said she desperately needed $120,000. I hadn't even reached the miscellaneous folder yet. Vacation deposits, kitchen renovation invoices, emergency credit card bailouts, Christmas gifts that grew more expensive every year. $45,000. I punched the final numbers into my calculator slowly, deliberately. $976,200. I stared at the display until it dimmed. Nearly $1 million. Not inherited, not won, earned, saved, given. I leaned back and closed my eyes. I remembered the promise I made to my wife at her hospital bed. "Don't worry about Caroline," I'd whispered. "I'll make sure she's secure." Secure, not spoiled, not entitled, not blind to reality. Somewhere along the way, my protection had turned into permission. My love had turned into a shield from consequences, and that shield had made monsters. I didn't cry. I didn't feel guilt. I felt clarity. At 8:47 the next morning, I picked up the phone. The first call was to the bank. "I need to cancel all automatic payments linked to my checking account," I said calmly. The representative asked for verification. I answered without hesitation. "Mortgage assistance. Canceled. Car payments. Canceled. Insurance premiums. Canceled. School tuition transfers. Canceled." Each confirmation number went into my notebook. Precise, documented, final. I wasn't punishing them. I was restoring reality. By noon, the architecture that had held their lives together for 15 years was gone. And for the first time since my wife died, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not power, balance. They had mistaken my silence for weakness. They were about to learn the difference. I didn't announce what I had done. That was important. If I had warned them, they would have adjusted, borrowed, manipulated, delayed the fall. I wasn't interested in drama. I was interested in truth. Truth only appears when the safety net is gone. The first call came before noon. Caroline. Her voice wasn't frantic yet, just confused. "Dad," she said, "the bank called. They said our mortgage payment didn't go through." "That must be a mistake." I said nothing. She kept talking, filling the silence the way people do when they sense something is wrong but aren't ready to admit it. "They said there weren't enough funds in the account. But that can't be right, because you always—" She stopped. Always. I let the silence stretch. "What do you mean?" she finally asked, her voice thinner now. "I mean exactly what I said last night," I replied calmly. "I'm no longer paying your bills." The line went dead. By mid-afternoon, the calls multiplied. The insurance company had sent a notice. The school had called about tuition. The car payment had bounced. Sheldon called next. Not polite. Not confused. Angry. "What kind of game are you playing?" he demanded. "You can't just cut us off like this. There are obligations." "Show me the contract," I said. There was a pause. "Verbal agreements count," he snapped. "No," I replied. "Entitlement does not." He threatened lawyers, accused me of spite, claimed I was abusing my power. I listened. Then I hung up. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a notebook and checked off confirmation numbers. Every canceled payment was documented. Every decision deliberate. This wasn't revenge. It was a controlled collapse. By the second day, panic set in. Caroline called again, crying this time. "They're talking about foreclosure," she said. "Just penalties for now. But, Dad, this is serious." "Yes," I said, "it is." "You can't let the kids lose their home," she pleaded. "I didn't," I answered. You did, over 15 years. That night, I slept better than I had in months. On the third day, the community started noticing. The BMW wasn't in their driveway anymore. Repossession. Quiet. Efficient. Caroline took a job at a grocery store. I saw her name tag when I stopped by for milk. She wouldn't meet my eyes. I didn't rescue her. I watched. Because rescue teaches nothing. Consequence teaches everything. Sheldon tried to control the narrative, told people I'd abandoned them, that I was cruel, vindictive, unstable. Some believed him, until questions started. How did you afford that house? How long did Mark help you? Didn't he pay for the kids' school? Truth has a way of surfacing when lies lose funding. By the end of the week, the trap had closed. No money, no leverage, no illusion, only reality. And reality doesn't care how confident you sound at dinner. Sheldon still thought he was in control. That was the most dangerous part. Even after the payments stopped, even after the car disappeared, even after Caroline put on a blue grocery store vest and stood behind a register scanning items for people who used to envy her life. He believed this was temporary, a tantrum, a bluff. He told himself, I would fold. At Murphy's Bar, 2 blocks from their house, he told anyone who would listen that I'd lost perspective. Retirement messes with people, he said loudly. They feel irrelevant. They want attention. Someone asked how they were managing without my help. He laughed. Well, be fine. Mark's just trying to scare us. He needs us more than we need him. That confidence would have been impressive if it wasn't so disconnected from reality. Meanwhile, the math was eating them alive. The mortgage notice arrived in an official envelope. 30 days. Red ink. Legal language. No emotion. The school sent another reminder. Tuition overdue. Enrollment at risk. The utilities posted warning slips on their door. Caroline worked double shifts, 8 hours on her feet, then home to children asking questions she didn't know how to answer. Sheldon, instead of adjusting, doubled down. This is psychological warfare, he told her. He wants to break us. No, Caroline said quietly one night, staring at the kitchen table covered in bills. He wants us to grow up. Sheldon didn't hear her. Pride has a way of making men deaf. He called a lawyer. Not a good one, a loud one. The letter arrived by courier, thick with threats, accusations of elder abuse, financial coercion, emotional manipulation. I read it once, then I laughed. I called my attorney. He skimmed the document and shook his head. This won't go anywhere, he said. You were never obligated. Everything was voluntary, documented, clean, good. I liked clean. Sheldon escalated. He told neighbors I abandoned my grandchildren, that I was punishing innocent children over a bruised ego. Some people believed him, until they asked questions. How long was he paying your mortgage? How much help did he actually give? Why didn't you ever mention it before? The answers didn't sound good out loud, especially when Caroline's exhaustion became visible, especially when the BMW vanished, especially when the grocery store uniform appeared. Entitlement survives on illusion. Once illusion cracks, it collapses fast. The final straw came one night when Tommy asked his father why Grandpa wasn't a loser if he paid for everything. Sheldon snapped. Because he thinks money makes him important, he said sharply. Caroline looked at him like she'd never seen him before. No, she said, he was important before the money. We just forgot. That was when Sheldon realized something terrible. He wasn't losing money. He was losing narrative control. And without narrative control, arrogance turns into fear. He came to my house 2 days later, alone. No shouting, no demands. Just a man standing on my porch, shoulders slumped, confidence gone. "We need to talk," he said. For the first time, he didn't call me a loser. For the first time, he didn't look down. The storm he'd laughed through was finally overhead, and he knew it. The collapse didn't arrive all at once. It came in waves. The first wave was quiet. The foreclosure notice was taped to their front door on a Tuesday afternoon. Official, impersonal, ruthless. 30 days to cure the default. 3 missed payments, plus penalties. I heard about it from a neighbor before Caroline ever called me. When she did call, her voice sounded smaller than I remembered. "Dad," she said, "they're really serious this time." "Yes," I replied, "they usually are." The second wave hit their transportation. The BMW was gone when I drove past their house one morning. No dramatic tow truck. No confrontation. Just absence. Sheldon started driving an old Honda he bought used with what little cash they had left. The downgrade bruised him more than losing the house ever could. Image had always mattered more to him than stability. The third wave was the school. Centura Academy called Caroline directly. Tuition overdue. Enrollment subject to suspension. Immediate payment required. Tommy didn't understand why his backpack stayed by the door instead of going to school. Emma asked why her piano lessons were canceled. Caroline cried in the grocery store break room. I didn't intervene. Not yet. The fourth wave was public. People noticed. The same neighbors who once admired their lifestyle started asking quiet questions. The whispers grew louder as facts replaced stories. Sheldon said his father-in-law abandoned them. Did you know Mark paid their mortgage for years? I heard it was almost $1 million. The truth spread faster than Sheldon's excuses ever could. That was when the calls turned desperate. Not angry. Desperate. Caroline showed up at my door one afternoon wearing her work uniform. Her eyes were red. Her hands shook when she spoke. "Dad," she said, "we're going to lose the house." I looked at her. For the first time in years, I didn't see entitlement. I saw fear. "What do you want from me?" I asked. She swallowed. "I want my kids to be okay." That was the right answer. But it wasn't enough. Because saving children requires breaking parents. And that part hadn't happened yet. The hammer hadn't fully fallen. Not until Sheldon came back. Sheldon came back 3 days later. This time he didn't knock. He stood on my porch staring at the door like a man rehearsing words he didn't want to say. When I opened it, I almost didn't recognize him. His shirt was wrinkled. His eyes were rimmed red. The posture that once broadcast confidence now folded inward, defensive, uncertain. "We're out of time," he said quietly. I stepped aside and let him in. Caroline followed, holding Tommy's hand. Emma trailed behind them, clutching a stuffed animal. The living room filled with a silence heavier than anger. "The bank called this morning," Caroline said. "Foreclosure completes in 4 days." Tommy looked up at me. "Grandpa," he asked, "are we going to be homeless?" That question landed harder than any insult Sheldon had ever thrown at me. I crouched in front of him. "No," I said gently. "Not if I can help it." Sheldon exhaled sharply, relief flashing across his face too quickly. "That was my mistake to correct. I didn't say I would fix everything," I continued. "I said I would help." He stiffened. Caroline pulled a folded paper from her purse. A budget. Numbers scribbled in the margins. Reality finally written down. "Our income doesn't work," she said, voice breaking. "It never did. Without you, it never did." Sheldon swallowed. "I thought I was providing," he said. "I thought success meant keeping up." "No," I replied. "Success means standing on what you earn." The silence stretched. Then he said it. "I can't lose the house." "You already have," I said calmly. "You just haven't accepted it yet." That was when everything cracked. Sheldon sank into the chair, burying his face in his hands. "I didn't know," he said. "I didn't know it was that much." I opened my folder and slid it across the table. $976,200. Mortgage, cars, school, insurance, medical, everything itemized. Caroline gasped. Sheldon stared. For a long time, no one spoke. Finally, Emma broke the silence. "Why didn't you say thank you?" she asked her parents. Caroline covered her face and cried. Sheldon looked at me, eyes glassy. "I called you a loser," he said, "but I was living off you." "Yes," I replied, "you were." There was no anger in my voice, only fact. They didn't beg after that. They understood begging wouldn't work. "What do you want?" Caroline asked finally. I leaned back. "I want honesty," I said. "I want accountability. And I want my grandchildren protected." I laid out the terms slowly. I would pay for Tommy and Emma's education directly. I would cover their medical care, clothing, and activities. I would establish college funds in their names. But I would not pay the mortgage. I would not cover car payments. I would not subsidize adult lifestyles ever again. Sheldon nodded. "And," I added, "I want public acknowledgement, apologies, truth told without spin." Sheldon closed his eyes. His pride was dying in real time. Finally, he nodded. "Well, do it," he said. "All of it." That was the moment. Not victory, not revenge. Collapse. And collapse is where rebuilding begins. 3 months later, the house was quieter. Not empty, just honest. They downsized. A smaller place. Fewer rooms. Fewer illusions. The foreclosure never completed. Not because I rescued their lifestyle, but because they learned to live within reality. Caroline worked full-time now, on her feet, tired but different, grounded. Sheldon changed too, slowly, painfully. The arrogance didn't vanish overnight, but it cracked enough to let humility in. He stopped talking about image and started talking about math. Real math. What we could afford, what we couldn't, what he actually earned. I paid for the children. Their school tuition went directly to the academy. Their medical bills came to me, not their parents. I set up college funds in both their names with clear terms. No access, no shortcuts, only responsibility. The public apologies happened the following week. A letter ran in the local paper. Not dramatic, just honest. Acknowledging 15 years of support, admitting entitlement, expressing regret. Social media posts followed. Awkward, necessary. Some people judged, most understood. Respect, once lost, is expensive to buy back. Monthly family dinners became a rule, not to monitor finances, but to rebuild something healthier. No talk of money unless asked. No entitlement. No jokes at my expense. Just presence. One afternoon, Tommy asked me something that mattered. "Grandpa," he said, "are you still a loser?" I smiled. "No," I replied, "I never was." Emma hugged my leg and said, "You're the strongest person I know." That was my return on investment. Not gratitude, understanding. I travel now. The trips I postponed. The life I delayed while paying someone else's. I sleep better, eat slower, speak less. And when I look back, I don't regret helping. I regret helping without limits. Because kindness without boundaries is weakness, and love without consequences teaches nothing. My legacy isn't money, it's clarity.